Hi, friends. Welcome to Adobe Live Pro Tips. If you're here, you're probably really curious about typography. And today we're going to be exploring typography in Photoshop. Photoshop is the Jack, or today, the Jane of all trades. And today I will be your host. We're going to be exploring quite a bit. So I'm going to get started really quick, but I'm going to do a quick introduction. My name is Cyn Lagos. I will be your visual mentor today. I am a graphic designer, a photographer. I'm going to just play this in the back. I'm a photographer and aspiring filmmaker. I also love mentoring aspiring artists such as yourselves. My journey is very similar. I learned most of my work online, and I really love this space of collaboration and creative community. So let's get started on exploring the different ways that we can transform typography in Photoshop. All right. So right here, we are in Photoshop 2023. And I made this really cool artwork out of pure exploration. And one thing that you're going to find that is very common whenever I jump into any teaching method is that I'm always going to encourage you to experiment. Experimentation is how I've arrived at developing my own style, and also just always exploring new tools because everything is always ever changing. So this one in particular, I was exploring the concept of future. I think recently we've been really considering the developments of AI and how they speak to our creative methods. So I wanted to really explore that concept of future worlds in our creative spectrums, right? And of course, we give it a little bit of attitude, and I want to share with you how I accomplish this in Photoshop. We're going to manipulate a few of these fonts, but first, let's start with a blank canvas. In this case, I'm not going to do a horizontal space. I'm actually going to do this for Instagram. So I'm going to do a 4:5 ratio, which is going to be 1080 by 1350. Okay, so that is a 4:5 ratio. Cool. So that changes things a little bit. We're not in a horizontal ratio anymore. I'm going to begin by creating a black background. I feel like doing anything futuristic or having standout color palettes always have a better success rate when they're in a black background. So I'm going to attempt to do this here really quick. Maybe sometimes I try something a little bit off of black, maybe something like 80% black right there. All right. Oh, so Shift X to get your background color and Command Delete to get that applied to your layer. Great. So now as I get started here, I want to explore words. So in my case earlier, I was exploring the word future, right? Let's explore a different word today. I'm going to explore the word magic. So I'm going to spell it here and try to make it a little bit bigger. Now, the beauty about Photoshop, in my opinion, when it comes to managing fonts, there's a lot of different tools for you to manipulate it and transform it all together. I love using fonts in Illustrator, and this space here kind of gives me a different approach to what would otherwise be a vector text, and try to approach it a little bit more malleably. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So I already have a font chosen here. It's called Balboa. And there's something really interesting here. Whenever I am at a loss of what kind of fonts should I use, I often like to go in here and find a font that I like, any given one. And if I choose a font, for example, this one, and I want something that is similar in fashion, I can press that little squiggly equal there. And it's going to give me different variations of that same font that is in the similar aspect. So I have this cool soap regular here. So you can see is very close to that classic Cooper Bold, but it just gives it that little bit of umph. So it's a little bit more different. So I'm going to choose that one in this case. And I like the way it looks. I already pre-selected my green color palette here. I think when it comes to color palettes, it's really interesting to play with colors that are not quite exactly a primary color. So instead of picking a normal green, I have a bit of a pastel green here. Instead of picking a normal black, I have a bit of an 80% black hue here. All right, so let's start playing with this option. So what I'm going to do here in my layers panel, I'm actually going to copy this and drag it over to that little plus sign just to copy it. You can also, if you're part of the shortcut community, you might want to use Command J to copy that. So I'm going to keep this one safely and just turn it off, right? So we want to work non-destructively. And I'm going to begin by doing something fairly like straightforward because I want to get the magic out as soon as possible. So I'm going to go into the filter panel and go into Liquify, right? So I'm going to go into Liquify. It asks me if I want to convert it to a smart object. What this means often is that you can always go back and undo. That's how I see it. A smart object means I'm working smart and I am not destroying my original file. And I can always go back and reset it and start over if I need to. So smart object, yes, I want that. So I have this here and I have a few options to now actually manipulate the pixels within my text. But the text remains editable because we created a smart object, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to start dragging some of these parts. So it starts to feel a little bit less stiff and a little bit more malleable. I think that's kind of the cool part. And you got to do a little bit of experimenting here to see what works for you, right? I am working with this particular tool, which is the warp tool right at the very top. And there are multiple tools here for you to manipulate whatever pixels you bring into this area. I'm going to press OK for now, and I have this modification of my original font, right? Now, there's these different ways that we can create. We have to create a transformation within our fonts. We have to keep in consideration that we're working in a digital space, but what makes it a standout piece often is when we translate these organic elements into a digital space. So in this case, I'm actually going to go into the blur tool right here. We have the blur tool, and I'm going to start to manipulate this font that we already chose in this case. I'm going to copy this again, so Command J, and I'm going to manipulate this by rasterizing it first for now, right? We already have a copy, so we're cool. All right, so now we have this variation. Cool. So now I can actually come in here and start blurring some of the edges. And I want to do that because I'm trying to emulate a sense of organic textures within my scene. And that really makes it a bit of a standout image because we're not accustomed to seeing something organic in a digital space, right? So I'm going to double click here and open up my layer style. And in my layer style, I want to go inside the channels panel, and I'm going to remove one of the RGB channels. And you can experiment which one you want. You can either remove the red and you get this hue here, or you can remove the green, you get this purple. You can remove two of them, you start getting something like this. I think I like that one. So I'm going to do that. And now when we start pulling on this image, right? When we start pulling on this image, I'm going to zoom in here so you can see a little bit better. We start to modify that edge. And so it starts to get a little bit more blurry. And that's pretty cool because here you go. That's better. Oh, back to my blur tool. Kind of missed it there for a second. So we want to modify those edges a little bit, just so that it starts to look a little bit more organic. And I like doing this especially because fonts tend to have these really crisp edges, and we want to really emulate something more like ghostly, right? More magic oriented. Now, another way that I can also choose to accomplish this is I can go into the distort, into the blur panel, actually. Let me say blur, here, blur gallery. The tilt shift tool is one of my favorite tools to use in Photoshop in order to modify or transform anything from being completely crisp pixels to having these blur, cool, magical edges on them. And you can start to see how that works here on those edges. And that one was a little bit faster than the blur tool in this case. So I think I'm going to roll with that. And I like how it really expands it. Another way to really push that a little bit, I'm going to try to rotate it with that tiny little edge. And I can pull on this side and make that either a little bit stronger or sort of expand it across the pixels. I feel like something like that is a little bit more obvious, and that's kind of where I want it. That's pretty cool, right? I feel like this is one of my favorite things to use. Even on regular shapes, it doesn't have to be specifically for typography. So I like that. I like how that's looking. And when I place this one below it, I can start to see some of it seeping through. So I might want to actually blend this a little bit better. So I'm going to place it on top. Let's move this properties panel over. I'm going to place it on top and start playing with the blending tools. And the blending tools can be quite magical once you start to explore them, especially when you're working with color palettes that are a little bit contrasted to each other, so that you can start to accomplish something rather interesting, right? You can see there, we actually accomplished that outline that you saw in the previous example. And so that's fairly neat there. I like this. The subtraction one is always my favorite. Exclusion tends to give some really gnarly, exclusion and difference, some really gnarly examples too. So I might go back into my filter Liquify here to try to actually modify it quite a bit more, so it starts to look more different from the other one, from the one we had below it. Ooh, maybe that's a little bit too much. That C is still needs to be a little bit legible, so there's some kind of guidelines you want to keep in mind, right? All right, so we have it a little bit like that. And I'm going to go back into subtract. Cool. And we start to see that sort of coming together, but I'm going to put that in the back this time. All right, cool. So one of the things that I like to play around with when it comes to deciding what kind of colors I like to use, I like to start introducing a bit of a great adjustment layer. So an adjustment layer is going to help with applying something to your layer without destroying it. So I'm going to go into this one. Cool. So I'm going to go into this one, and I'm going to double click it for now to change the color palette a little bit. Sweet. I think I want something a bit more vibrant. Nice. And I'm going to introduce a gradient map with the color adjustment, right? So I'm going to double click on that, and it gives me this gradient map, which is applying to the entire scene. So I'm going to double click on purple hues because I love seeing all the different variations that I can create just by adding a gradient map to my text and the layer below that, which is currently affecting. Kind of love how these colors just give you a brand new color palette in here. No, I think I like this one here. There was one right here that I really liked. Tend to go more for like the darker purple hues. Let's go with this one here. All right, cool. So I'm gonna do a clipping mask so that actually, no, maybe not. Let's keep it that way. So I'm gonna actually move this over. That was a pretty neat example, but I don't know if it's really coming together just yet. I'm gonna double click on this image, this text layer, and I'm going to modify that text because I think that font isn't quite working for us. So because it's we converted it into a smart object, we can still modify not only what it says, so we can modify this from magic to energy, for example, and make it a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger. We can completely change what it says, the sizing, and the text, the font of it. So I can actually modify this to something like this. Right? Place that in the center. Okay, you see it there. We're going to press save, and that is linked directly to all of the modifications that we already made to that layer. So you can see it still honors all that Liquify element that we created into this text without us having to do it all over again, which is really, really cool. So I can always go back and reset myself and modify things as I go along. So always trying to work non-destructively. I feel like it's a super important element of developing your project workflow so that you can always undo whenever possible. So I was really curious about really selecting my own font options here. And the other day I took a picture of this. Let me see, I'm going to put it at the very top of this book, and I really liked it. And I was like, oh, that font is neat. I love the way that they used it. I kind of want to know what font that is, but it's kind of tricky to know, to find them on your own, searching the libraries forever and ever, right? So we actually can skip that step altogether and go here into type and go into match font. And we can actually find ourselves this font. So whenever you're kind of on the go and you find a really cool sign somewhere, I know that there's so many cool neon signs here in Austin, Texas. I encourage you to take a picture of it and bring it into Adobe Photoshop and try to find the font options. So it does give you some options here. What type of font am I looking for? Is it a Roman font? Is it a Japanese font? We have a Roman font in this case. And it gives me these different variations of sans serif fonts, serif fonts, without sans serif fonts that fit the kind of aesthetic of this particular font. So at this one up here pretty much covers it, don't you think? This one is almost exactly that font. Although this font looks like it underwent a few modifications prior to like being printed. It's still a very close one. And even if I wanted to choose sort of a style or aesthetic that was similar, I can have these other options available on Adobe Font. So I can just make them accessible. It says show fonts available to activate from Adobe Fonts. So from the cloud, it makes them accessible and you can find them right away. So I think I'm going to select this Birch STD regular font, and I'm going to move forward with that. And I'm going to create a few more keywords here. I'm going to go forward with that magic element that we talked about. So we can create a poster element of our design. And I think I want it in capital, and capitals looks way better. And maybe we're going to do a little bit of adjustment here. So in our properties panel, we often have all of these different tools for us to modify our font. Maybe you're familiar with some of these, but just in case, we have our sizes and we have our leading, which is the spacing from up and down. We have our kerning, which is the spaces between characters. So I think I'm going to use the spacing between characters and increase it quite a little bit because I think it looks a little more completed in that way. And I'm going to center this. That looks nice. And once I select this, you're going to find that when I've selected the text, right, this panel comes to life. And you see a lot of different options. Your usual ones, you know, your color palettes, things like that. But then there's also this very curious one. It says create warp text. And under warp text, I really enjoy this. This is similar to that Liquify effect. We're going to be able to go into several options that can modify our text. So we can bold our text, we can create a bit of a flag effect. And of course, all of these have these levers here, which can help you just create that modification a little bit with a little bit more precision. We like precision, right? That's always very nice. And of course, these things take quite a little bit of time, but we're here exploring and experimenting, right? I kind of like it like that. And it's quite interesting to see how it works if you switch it from horizontal to vertical, and so many effects here that you can experiment with in your text fonts. Okay, I'm gonna keep this one. I feel like this one's pretty cool. I'm liking the way it sort of goes up in that area here, and that looks pretty awesome. And just gonna try to unite them together. And I think that font color is pretty cool. All right, so let's repeat that effect that we created on the magic. I like this font a lot more. I think that tilt shift definitely needed to be explored better on this font choice. That's why it's so good to have those smart objects, because I was able to revisit my text choice and my font choice and modify it. Okay, so I'm gonna, let's see, rasterize this layer for now. And I'm gonna go into, let's see where this layer is. Oops. Here you are. There you are. Don't hide from me. Okay, and we're gonna remove one of the colors. Nice. That is a bit of a red there. But remember, it's under this gradient map, so that's why it looks like that, right? It's modifying those colors. And I'm gonna go into filter, distort. I always go into distort, blur gallery, tilt shift. All right. And also, by the way, I'm going to tell you something, a little secret, because honestly, I sometimes lose my place of where are all these tools, right? That's why secretly I learn shortcuts, because then I don't have to go look for them. And that's really helpful for me. But whenever I'm a little bit lost and I can't really find it, then I'll go into this search bar right here and search the tool, if I can remember the name, tilt shift. And it basically gives me the different options. It tells me it's in the blur gallery, right? That gives me, it does a search on the program itself. So you no longer have to spend all this time sort of lost of like, where did I put that font, or where was that really cool tool that I experimented with the other day, and things like that, which absolutely happens way too often. Okay, so I'm going to go into the Liquify and just move this one around just a little bit to the sides. All right, now you can see it there a little bit better. I might want to explore some of the color palettes here. See if there's a few other ones that we can explore. Something like this. Oh, that one's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know. I kind of like the previous one. What do you guys think? This or this? All right. So we're going to do a quick gradient here to add to our scene. And so I'm going to do that by creating a new layer. And we're going to be exploring gradients this week. So we're going to explore them quite a bit, but we're going to do a quick one here. I'm going to choose this color, maybe something like here. Color choices are always so tricky, in my opinion, until you really develop that sort of style. Say I do something like this, and then we're going to do a different tone of that. Maybe something like this. And then one more color. I know it looks pretty wild right now, but it's okay. Trust me. And then we're going to go into filter liquify. Filter liquify. Thank you. Okay. And we're just going to create a bit of a funky gradient here. Nice. Sweet. I like that. Magic indeed. It's starting to look really, really groovy. We're going to go into noise and add some noise because we want that sensibility of, hey, this is organic, isn't quite digital. And we're going to start playing with our modes in here and see how it starts to apply to our text below. Hey, that one's really neat. Let's see. What do we have going on in here that is modifying it? There you go. So you can start to see how cool that starts to look once we start experimenting with typography, with modifying fonts and experimenting. Thank you all for being here. I'll see you on the next one.